Now, many of these pillars have remarkable carvings on them, wonderful carvings and bas-reliefs of animals, birds, insects, all kinds of things. So to fashion those and carve them and set them up in these structures was just absolutely amazing.
12,000 years ago, long before writing, cities, or farming, someone built a temple. Not a hut, not a fire ring, but massive limestone pillars carved with lions, scorpions, and serpents, arranged in perfect circles with precision that would challenge modern engineers. This is Göbekli Tepe, built by hunter-gatherers with no agriculture, no metal tools, and no permanent settlements.
Is because of just how old it is. It's a site that dates back a staggering 12,000 years to the Neolithic period, a site that predates agriculture by about 1,000 years.
Why would a society this primitive move tons of stone and create something so monumental? What drove them to carve, organize, and worship on a scale that defies everything we thought we knew about human civilization? Göbekli Tepe doesn't just predate history, it rewrites it, and its secrets are only beginning to be understood. Stone before civilization. Klaus Schmidt was not looking for Göbekli Tepe. He was looking for something else entirely. In the autumn of 1994, Schmidt, a researcher with the German Archaeological Institute, was conducting a survey of prehistoric sites in the Şanlıurfa province of southeastern Turkey.
Şanlıurfa, Turkey, October 1994.
The site of Göbekli Tepe is a series of circular enclosures.
He had read the 1963 survey notes written by Peter Benedict, the University of Chicago anthropologist who first visited the hilltop as part of a joint survey with the University of Istanbul. Benedict had noted the broken limestone slabs protruding from the surface and classified the site as an abandoned medieval cemetery. A reasonable assumption at the time, since local farmers had been plowing around those stones for generations without thinking twice about them. But Schmidt had spent years excavating Nevalachori, another pre-pottery Neolithic site roughly 50 miles northwest, where monumental T-shaped pillars had been found in association with ritual architecture.
One of the largest T-shaped pillars, which would have stood at between 22 and 24 feet tall. And so this is something I tried to find last year, failed miserably. So we managed to get a guard to come and show us while it's not very busy here at Göbekli Tepe.
He knew what those pillar fragments looked like. He knew what they meant. And when he climbed the hill, Göbekli Tepe means potbelly hill in Turkish, named for its distinctive rounded shape, he saw something Benedict hadn't recognized: flint chips, millions of them. The surface of the hill was carpeted with lithic debris, the waste material of stone tool production on a scale Schmidt had never encountered. This was not a cemetery. This was a manufacturing site, a gathering point, a place where enormous numbers of people had come, worked, and left behind an industrial volume of knapped flint that had been sitting in plain sight for 12,000 years. As Schmidt later told colleagues that he knew within minutes of reaching the hilltop that this was the site he would work for the rest of his life. He was right. He began excavating in 1995 and never stopped. What emerged from the earth over the next 2 decades redefined everything. The site contains at least 20 circular and oval enclosures, identified by ground-penetrating radar surveys conducted by Helmut Becker of the Bavarian State Department of Monuments, of which only 6 have been substantially excavated. Each enclosure is defined by a ring of massive T-shaped limestone pillars, monoliths standing up to 18 feet tall and weighing between 7 and 15 tons, set into sockets carved directly into the bedrock floor. In the center of each ring stand 2 larger pillars, taller than the rest, eye-facing each other like sentinels. The quarry has been found. It lies on the hilltop plateau itself, roughly 100 meters from the enclosures. Archaeologists identified the negative impressions in the bedrock where pillars had been cut. Long rectangular channels carved into the limestone using flint tools and brute percussion. One unfinished pillar, still attached to the bedrock on its underside, measures roughly 23 feet long and weighs an estimated 50 tons, far larger than any pillar successfully erected at the site. Like the abandoned quarry stones at Baalbek, it suggests a civilization pushing the boundaries of what it could achieve. The logistics are staggering. Estimates by Schmidt's team suggest that quarrying, transporting, carving, and erecting a single pillar required a coordinated workforce of at least 500 people. These were not farmers with surplus labor. These were nomadic hunter-gatherers, people who lived in small, mobile bands following seasonal game across the landscape of the Fertile Crescent. Assembling 500 of them in one place required food, organization, leadership, and a reason compelling enough to pull people away from the daily business of survival. Radiocarbon dating of organic material embedded in the enclosure walls, conducted across multiple campaigns using accelerator mass spectrometry, places the earliest construction phases at approximately 9,600 to 9,000 BC.
Göbekli Tepe was constructed around 9,600 BCE. Now this was absolutely shocking. Remember, this date puts the site in the Stone Age.
The most recent phases date to around 8,000 BC. The site was actively built, used, modified, and expanded over a continuous period of roughly 1,600 years. Schmidt spent the rest of his career at Göbekli Tepe. He died in July 2014 while swimming in Germany, having excavated less than 5% of the site. He once described it as the discovery that would occupy archaeologists for the next 50 years. He may have underestimated. Carved by the stars. The carvings at Göbekli Tepe are not decorative, they are not random, and they are not simple. This became clear as excavation progressed and the full scope of the iconographic program was revealed. The animals depicted on the pillars are not the animals that the builders ate. Faunal analysis of the bone remains at the site, conducted by Joris Peters and his team at the Ludwig Maximilian University of Munich, showed that the primary food source for the people who gathered at Göbekli Tepe was gazelle, supplemented by wild cattle, wild pig, and various small game. Gazelle bones dominate the faunal assemblage by an overwhelming margin, but gazelles are almost entirely absent from the pillar carvings. Instead, the carvings emphasize predators, scavengers, and dangerous animals, creatures that threaten, that kill, that inhabit the boundary between the human world and the wild. Lions, leopards, vultures, snakes, scorpions, spiders. These are not food animals. These are fear animals, power animals, symbolic animals. The distinction is critical. It means the carvings are not a record of daily life. They are a record of belief. The builders were not illustrating their dinner. They were illustrating their cosmology, the forces they revered, feared, or sought to control through ritual and representation. And the arrangement is not random either. Our archaeoastronomer Giulio Magli of the Politecnico di Milano published a study in 2013 suggesting that the enclosures at Göbekli Tepe may be oriented toward specific points on the horizon corresponding to the rising of Sirius, the brightest star in the night sky, which was gradually becoming visible from that latitude during the epoch of construction due to the precession of the equinoxes. If Magli's analysis is correct, the builders of Göbekli Tepe were tracking stellar positions with a sophistication that we don't normally associate with any culture until the Babylonians, nearly 8,000 years later. Martin Sweatman and Dimitrios Tsikritsis of the University of Edinburgh went further. In a 2017 paper published in Mediterranean Archaeology and Archaeometry, but they proposed that a specific pillar at Göbekli Tepe, Pillar 43 in Enclosure D, known informally as the Vulture Stone, encodes a date. The animal symbols on the pillar, they argued, correspond to astronomical constellations, and their arrangement records the position of the stars at a specific moment in time, approximately 10,950 BC. That date is significant. It falls within the window of the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, the theory that a comet or asteroid fragment struck the Earth around 10,800 BC, triggering a sudden return to Ice Age conditions that lasted over 1,000 years. The Younger Dryas was a genuine catastrophe. Global temperatures plummeted. Megafauna went extinct across North America. Human populations were severely disrupted. Did the builders of Göbekli Tepe witness this event? Did they carve a record of cosmic catastrophe into a limestone pillar on a hilltop in Turkey? Sweatman and Sakritsis believe so. The mainstream archaeological community remains divided. But the hypothesis has not been refuted, and the precision of the proposed astronomical encoding is difficult to dismiss as coincidence. What is not disputed is that the people who built Göbekli Tepe possessed observational and symbolic capabilities far beyond what the conventional timeline of human intellectual development would predict. They were watching the sky. They were recording what they saw. They were encoding that information in stone using a symbolic system sophisticated enough to be debated by university professors 12,000 years later. These were not primitive people doing primitive things. These were people with a knowledge system, but a cosmology, a tradition of observation and representation that had been developing presumably for centuries or millennia before the first pillar was raised. And that raises the hardest question of all. Where did it come from? Knowledge systems of this complexity don't appear overnight. They develop over generations, refined by repetition, tested by observation, transmitted through teaching. The cosmology encoded at Göbekli Tepe was not invented by the people who carved it. It was inherited. From whom? From what tradition? Stretching back how far into the unrecorded past? We don't know. The trail goes cold at the bedrock of Potbelly Hill. Whatever came before Göbekli Tepe, whatever millennia of accumulated knowledge produced the confidence to attempt a project of this scale, it left no trace that we have found. Yet, beer, bones, and pillars. For the first 2 decades of excavation, Göbekli Tepe was studied with traditional archaeological methods: trowels, brushes, wheelbarrows, grid squares, pencils, and patience. Klaus Schmidt's team uncovered 4 major enclosures and portions of several others, mapping the visible architecture with painstaking care. But Schmidt always knew there was more. Ground-penetrating radar surveys conducted during his tenure indicated that the excavated enclosures represented a small fraction of the total site. Beneath the surface of Potbelly Hill, the radar showed anomalies, circular patterns, pillar-shaped voids, structural outlines, extending across an area of roughly 22 acres. Less than 5% of Göbekli Tepe has been excavated. The remaining 95% is still underground, untouched, waiting. Since Schmidt's death in 2014, the excavation has continued under the direction of Lee Clare and a team from the German Archaeological Institute in partnership with the Schönlurfa Museum. And the technology they are deploying is transforming what we know about the site. High-resolution LiDAR scanning, light detection and ranging has mapped the surface topography of the hill at centimeter accuracy, revealing subtle depressions and elevation changes that correspond to buried structures identified by radar. Photogrammetric 3D modeling has created digital twins of the excavated enclosures, allowing researchers to study the spatial relationships between pillars, carvings, and architectural features without physically being on site. Portable X-ray fluorescence analyzers have been used to determine the chemical composition of pigment residues found on pillar surfaces. Residues that suggest the carvings were originally painted in red, white, and black. The pillars were not the austere gray monoliths we see today. They were painted, the animals were colored, the figures had pigmented surfaces. Imagine walking into one of those enclosures 12,000 years ago by firelight or torchlight and seeing painted leopards and vultures and serpents looming above you on pillars twice your height, their eyes rendered in mineral pigment, their surfaces alive with flickering shadow. The experience would have been overwhelming. It was designed to be overwhelming. An isotopic analysis of human teeth found at the site, conducted by teams from multiple European universities, has revealed that the people who gathered at Göbekli Tepe came from vast distances. Strontium isotope ratios in tooth enamel, which reflect the geology of the water a person drank during childhood, indicate that individuals from at least several hundred kilometers away made the journey to this hilltop. Göbekli Tepe was not a local shrine. It was a regional pilgrimage center, a place that drew people from across the Fertile Crescent. The feasting evidence supports this interpretation dramatically. The site has yielded tens of thousands of animal bones, primarily gazelle, but also aurochs, boar, and various birds, along with massive stone vessels capable of holding up to 160 liters of liquid. Residue analysis on these vessels are conducted by researchers including Oliver Dietrich of the German Archaeological Institute, detected chemical signatures consistent with fermented grain beverages, beer, or something close to it. 12,000 years ago, at a site with no agriculture, people were brewing and consuming fermented drinks in quantities that suggest communal feasting on an enormous scale. The implication is extraordinary. The earliest evidence of brewing does not come from a farmstead. It comes from a temple. People may have learned to process grain not to make bread, but to make beer, not to feed themselves, but to fuel the rituals that brought their community together. The farm didn't create the feast. The feast may have created the farm. And in 2021, a discovery added yet another layer of complexity. Fragments of a life-sized human statue were found during excavation of a previously unexplored area. The figure, carved from limestone standing approximately 6 feet tall, is the earliest known life-sized human sculpture ever discovered. Its face is naturalistic, not stylized. It has individual features. It may represent a specific person, a priest, a leader, an ancestor. If confirmed, it pushes the origin of portrait sculpture back by approximately 7,000 years. Every new technology applied to Göbekli Tepe reveals something unexpected. Every new excavation season produces findings that force revisions to existing models. The site is not shrinking under scrutiny. It is expanding. And the picture that is emerging is not of a simple ritual site, but of something far more ambitious. A monumental complex built and maintained over centuries by a network of communities spread across hundreds of miles, united by shared beliefs, shared symbols, and a shared determination to build something that would endure. A monument to silence. Perhaps the strangest thing about Göbekli Tepe is not how it was built, it is how it ended. Around 8000 BC, roughly 2,000 years after construction began, the enclosures were deliberately buried, not destroyed, not abandoned to collapse. Buried, intentionally filled with rubble, soil, animal bones, stone tools, and refuse, then sealed and covered until the hill assumed its smooth, rounded shape, the potbelly that gave it its modern Turkish name. The backfill was not random dumping. Archaeologists have identified distinct layers in the fill material, suggesting the burial was conducted in stages, possibly over decades or centuries. Some enclosures appear to have been filled while others remained in use, as if the complex was being decommissioned section by section, according to a plan. Why? This is the question that keeps archaeologists arguing at conferences and staring at ceilings at 3 in the morning. Why would a community, or a network of communities, invest centuries of labor in building a monumental complex, maintain it for 2,000 years, and then deliberately bury it? It makes no practical sense. The enclosures were not falling down. The pillars were not collapsing. The site was not sinking or flooding. There is no evidence of damage from earthquake, fire, or military attack. The burial was a choice. A decision made by people who had every reason to keep using the site and who instead chose to seal it. Some researchers have proposed that the burial was itself a ritual act, the final ceremony in a tradition that understood its own ending. A controlled death, not for the people, but for the place. A closing of the circle. Just as individual enclosures were built, used, and eventually filled to make way for new ones, the entire complex may have followed a life cycle that was always intended to conclude with interment. Others have suggested that the burial coincides with, and may have been caused by, the very transition the site helped set in motion. By 8000 BC, the communities of southeastern Turkey were well on their way to becoming agricultural. Settlements like Çatalhöyük were emerging. Domesticated wheat and barley were replacing wild grains. The old nomadic hunter-gatherer way of life that had built Göbekli Tepe was giving way to the sedentary, farming-based existence that would define the Neolithic Revolution. If Göbekli Tepe was a product of the hunter-gatherer world, if it was in some sense the cathedral of a dying way of life, then its burial may represent the moment when that world recognized its own obsolescence. The new way of living didn't need a pilgrimage center on a hilltop. It needed fields, granaries, and permanent villages. The temple had served its purpose. It was time to let it sleep. Whatever the reason, the burial preserved the site in a way that open-air exposure never could have. The backfill protected the pillars from weathering, the carvings from erosion, and the painted surfaces from the bleaching of 12,000 Mediterranean summers. When Schmidt's team began excavating in 1995, they found carvings as sharp as the day they were cut. The burial that ended Göbekli Tepe as a living place is the reason it survives as a legible one.
If Göbekli Tepe hadn't been found, none of this would have happened, but it's led to a widespread interest.
The builders destroyed the site by burying it, and in doing so, they saved it for us. The global impact. Göbekli Tepe does not fit neatly into the textbooks, and that is exactly why it matters. The standard narrative of human civilization, the one built by V. Gordon Childe in the 1930s and taught in universities ever since, runs roughly as follows. Humans migrated out of Africa. They lived as nomadic hunter-gatherers for tens of thousands of years, producing stone tools, cave art, and little else of lasting consequence. Then, around 10,000 years ago, they discovered agriculture. Agriculture led to permanent settlements. Settlements led to cities. Cities led to writing, religion, art, science, and everything we call civilization. Childe called it the Neolithic Revolution, and for nearly a century it remained the foundational model of how complex societies emerged. Göbekli Tepe proves that this sequence is, at minimum, incomplete. Monumental architecture came before agriculture. Organized religion came before settled communities. Symbolic thought sophisticated enough to produce encoded astronomical records came before pottery. The hunter-gatherers of the pre-Neolithic world were capable of feats of organization.
From the Neolithic age, and amongst the discoveries are the microlithic stone tools, beads made from shells and agate, and pottery with some distinctive patterns.
Artistic expression and intellectual abstraction that we have been attributing exclusively to their farming descendants for the past century and a half. And then the genetic evidence now ties Göbekli Tepe directly to the agricultural revolution itself. In 2015, a landmark study published in Science by a team including Manfred Hune of the Norwegian University of Life Sciences used DNA analysis of modern and ancient wheat strains to trace the origin of domesticated einkorn wheat. The genetic trail led to a specific location, the Karakada Mountains, roughly 60 miles northeast of Göbekli Tepe. The earliest known transition from wild to domesticated grain occurred within walking distance of the temple complex, during the same period the site was active. This is not a coincidence. It is a causal link. The people who gathered at Göbekli Tepe in their hundreds, feasting, building, carving, needed food. Wild grain could be harvested, but not reliably, and not in the quantities required to feed a workforce for weeks or months at a time. The pressure to supply the temple may have been the very force that pushed local populations to begin cultivating and selecting grain, not for survival, for worship. Ian Hodder, the Stanford archaeologist who directed excavations at Çatalhöyük for over 2 decades, has argued precisely this point. Göbekli Tepe forces us to rethink the entire concept of the Neolithic revolution. It was not a single event. It was not a clean economic decision, hungry people figuring out that seeds grow. It was a long, messy, overlapping process in which the sacred and the practical were intertwined from the very beginning. That the desire to build a temple may have been the very thing that motivated people to figure out how to grow enough food to support the workforce required to build it. The temple didn't come after the farm. The temple may have created the need for the farm. The global archaeological community has recognized what is at stake. In 2018, UNESCO inscribed Göbekli Tepe as a World Heritage Site, citing its outstanding universal value as evidence of a previously unknown stage in human cultural development. The Turkish government invested over $15 million in a protective roof structure, completed in 2017, to shield the excavated enclosures from weathering while research continues. The site now draws over 1 million visitors per year, making it one of Turkey's most visited archaeological destinations. A hill that was a wheat field 30 years ago,
which is pretty unusual, very unusual for this part of the state or this part of the country,
transformed into a pilgrimage center for the second time in its existence. But the real impact is intellectual, not touristic. If the origins of civilization are not economic but spiritual, if the first great project of human collective action was not a granary or an irrigation canal but a sanctuary, then we have fundamentally misunderstood the driving force behind our own development. The first thing that made us build, organize, innovate, and cooperate at scale was not hunger. It had meaning. The need to gather, to carve the forces of the cosmos into stone, to stand together in the presence of something larger than any individual life. And if something that fundamental was waiting under a hill in Turkey for 12,000 years, unrecognized, misidentified as a medieval cemetery by the first people who looked at it, what else is out there? The ground has kept its secrets for 12,000 years, and it will keep them a little longer. But each season, each technological advance, cracks the silence just a bit, revealing circles, pillars, and carvings that challenge everything we thought we knew about our past. Göbekli Tepe didn't just rewrite history. It reminded us that history can be buried, deliberately, for reasons we may never understand. So the question isn't what we've uncovered. It's what else is waiting, hidden beneath the soil, that could upend everything we think we know about humanity.